Hi everyone, how are we doing? Good. I'm going to start by first having you all stand up. We are going to consume and engage with a lot of information over the next day and a half, and I think we need to make sure that we have the energy and attention for it. So let's actually just take a nice big deep breath in. Breathe it out and soften your shoulders. Now, if that breath was just a shallow one in the chest, breathe into your diaphragm, down underneath your ribs. Big breath in. Okay. Now, we're going to take a seat, and I'm going to dive into an experience that we need to have where we're really understanding and honouring the whole human being within the context of people analytics and getting the best out of human beings. And that means not only performance, but well-being. What does that look like in workplaces and in people's lives as a whole? That's the terrain we're going to cover. My academic background is in organisational psychology, but in practical terms, we need to make sure that this science is brought to life within our organisations and having the conversation that's not happening around the whole human experience, not just the employee experience. So that's what we're going to dive into. So who is Benny Button? Al gave us a little bit of an introduction. We like to just give a little one-liner as to our mission, which is to really help people and organisations live well and have impact. So people data for good means helping the individual to benefit from this experience and this transaction, if you will, as well as the organisation. And to live well and have impact means to be at your best and to contribute and add value and to perform and to function as well as you can. Not one at the expense of the other, which is what we're going to talk about, where the push to perform actually leads to a level of neglect or sacrificing of what it means to live well. And we're seeing significant issues in that space, that's for sure. So the issues include, and I'm going to share some up on the screen with a bit of a visual so we can really get ourselves tuned into perhaps some of these experiences that we're having, or perhaps they're experiences that people around us are having that are creating difficulties at enabling them to live at their best. So ongoing change and the challenges that are happening within the context of not only our work, but our lives outside of work as well. And the only constant is change. Have we heard that one? Maybe you've even said that one as a leader. But it's kind of true, right? And the thing is that change and ongoing challenges can be met with this sense that it's debilitating. It has an impact on people. People are strained as a result. But can we realize that change adds value when we do it well, and it's through change and challenging ourselves that we grow our potential and have the opportunity to give greater impact. So these challenges need to be held with an open mind so that we can navigate our way skillfully. The do more with less challenge is a harder one to swallow though, but this is one that we hear about. It's another mantra in organisations where the demand has increased to a point where the available resources to cope are not where they need to be. Now, in other words, this is actually the definition of stress. The demand is greater than the available resource. That creates stress and strain on any system, and human beings are no different. So what are we doing to help people to actually maintain a level of well-being whilst they're trying to do more and more? Because the work and life juggling act is real, and people can feel like within the context of work and life, they've got this overcommitted schedule, this to-do list that they never actually get it all done, and that can be incredibly stress-promoting. We can feel overwhelmed, overloaded. We're in the attention economy, the information economy, where there's things binging and buzzing and pinging, and there's information and stimulus and emails and so on just bombarding us at all the time. And it can be like we're trying to consume, like drinking from a fire hose, and that actually renders us underproductive as a result. So at times where there's an abundance, where we should be wiser for it, it's actually debilitating. The flow-on effect when we're not mastering this and handling this is that we can get distracted and disconnected from the things that matter most. And that's either the things that are truly aligned with your own values or disconnected from those around you that you really ought to be investing your precious time and attention with. This image here, and in particular, thinking about this, does that provoke a sense of anxiety? the sense that the battery is running out, and we feel it with our handheld devices, but the same experience is happening for us day in, day out, where we're depleting ourselves of the energies and resources that we need to continue doing our best, yet the demand is still on us. It was mentioned before, like feeling time poor. We have so many things to do, but we just can't get it all done. And I think that time and poor management of time is actually a bit of an excuse. And in actual fact, we should look at what's really going on, because time can't really be managed. Time just happens, time passes. We need to organize ourselves differently. And as a result, what we really need to focus on is how are we using our attention? So time happens, and there are things that need to get done, and we have far too much on our plates than we can possibly do. So how do we master our attention so we're focusing on the things that matter most? This is where analytics has an opportunity to actually shine the light, the spotlight, quite literally, on what are the important things that we need to attend to. But to give this a bit of a personal experience right now, it's valuable for us to really think about what we hear every time we jump on an aeroplane, which is, in the event of an increase in cabin pressure, an oxygen mask will fall from the roof. Fit your own oxygen mask first before helping others. So increase in pressure, look after yourself. It's not self-indulgent, don't feel guilty for it. When you look after yourself well, you can be at your best, do your best, and also contribute to the lives of others. And as a result, we need to really personalize and own that this is the reality of what we're dealing with. What are we going to do? What are we going to take away from sessions like this and start to practice with conviction into the future? So why is wellbeing important? Beyond the story that I'm building here, there are some really clear and significant costs in dollar terms of what's going on. So from a work perspective, and these are Australian figures, elsewhere the numbers are huge as well. Sickness and stress, the accumulated bill in excess of $125 billion a year. 31% of us, so over a third of us, are saying that work stress levels are unsustainable. Disengagement, if we're putting a figure on that, 70 plus billions of dollars, tens of billions more in the extreme cases of burnout. It's now a clinically diagnosable area of dysfunction. Untapped productivity. So these are not just well-being or health-related points of conversation. This is also about having impact and contributing the best of yourself from a performance and productivity standpoint. Now, when Ernst & Young crunched these numbers, they found that across the Australian population, 85% of us believe that we could contribute and perform better if we were able to make some adjustments and changes to the way that we were working. So what's the upside if we look at enhanced and improved well-being as well as performance and unlocking potential, not seeing one at the expense of the other or not recognizing that these two are interdependent. And let's not forget that there are life-related challenges here. So we can look at the work context and understand the work costs in dollar terms, but we're talking about human beings in their lives as well. Mental health issues, and as a psychologist, this is one that is really, really tough to engage with, but recent figures show it in excess of $180 billion a year. Now, there's 1 in 5 in a given year. 1 in 5 of us will experience a common mental health challenge. 50% of us across the lifespan will experience a common mental health challenge. It's not a statistic that we like talking about, but 8 people take their lives in Australia each day. And whilst this is uncomfortable, and you probably thought, wellbeing session, yeah, this is going to be uplifting, bit dramatic at the moment, we'll get there, but we can't trivialize what's going on and what we need to tune into and attend to in terms of what's at stake. Lifestyle-related diseases, 50% of us have one or more common health-related and a lifestyle disease, and the drag on the economy associated with poor health in excess of $164 billion a year. So the numbers are huge, and I know that there'll be interactions between these numbers and so forth, but the point is that there are work-related costs in terms of lost productivity, and it's not just health and well-being, it's also performance potential. And people's experiences in life are part of this equation as well, because these interact. There is spillover and interference between work and life experiences, and we need to honour that. So, another way to visualize where we've come from is to look at 2 axes that we can see as important, which is money and time. And so how have things actually changed over time? We've got a situation where there's lots of cost versus value being created at the top of the chart here. The prevailing and historical view of health and safety and metrics that explore what it is that we need to do in order to create progress has led to incredible advancements, and we should celebrate that by looking at what's problematic, dysfunctional, poor health, incidences, illnesses, and so forth, and how do we return them to zero or normal as much as that's possible. We've seen great gains. Not only for organizations is that valuable in terms of savings, but that's valuable for human beings. But we need to supplement that view moving forward with a new lens, and that's to increasingly look more at what's possible in cultivating people's capabilities, to build capacity, to be promotion-focused, looking at their well-being that enables them to perform at the peak of their potential. What we'll see is that there's no fixed reduction cost on that. Instead, what's the upside in terms of value? We're yet to explore what that could look like. What we find with a promotion focus on well-being as well is that we'll start to see some more incremental returns in terms of the costs that we haven't yet solved. So this, in my view, is the next frontier and where we need to focus, understanding the full spectrum. Not only what's dysfunctional and unhelpful from a health and illness perspective and how people are not functioning from a performance perspective at their best, but how can we actually promote and explore what great looks like. So work-life agility, well-being and performance, and how this all comes together is a really important concept and phenomena. And I'll explore and illustrate how we can understand this with data. Yet another graph. Breathe in, and let's go. But this one, I mean, the horizontal axis here, performance, is something that we understand, right? We know that that's something that we focus on. How can we have as much peak performance as much of the time as possible? But when we're thinking about performance in its fullest sense, we're thinking about a person's performance at work. So job performance is often what we see as synonymous with performance. But what does life performance look like? What does it really mean to have impact in the fullness of your life? So outside of work, not just at work. What we're talking about here is, are people having the best contribution that they can? So contribution can end up being a really important way for us to view performance into the future. But if all we're doing is looking at contribution, failing to recognize that it is interdependent with well-being, then we don't have a full sense of the puzzle. Because from lower through to higher levels of well-being, we understand the capacity, the resources, the energy, the skillfulness and capabilities required to continue to invest the best of yourself to perform and contribute at your best. So this sets up a bit of a space for us to understand what are the different types of human experiences that happen and how can we model and understand that within the context of our organizations. Now, when people are pushing the performance objective at the expense of well-being, well-being is being sacrificed, this is what we call the burning out zone. Now that high performance in the absence of well-being is not sustainable. These people will experience some kind of catastrophe, they may exit the organization, or the performance level is not sustainable and they will slide into this bottom left zone here. Now we already had a look at the costs of burnout, but also in this shutting off zone here is where we've got those significant costs in terms of health and sickness and stress and so forth. Now, people end up in this zone and it's not a nice place to be, but things fluctuate and we need to recognize that this is changeable and we can support people when we identify who's at risk and how to get them back on track. Now, if we've got high levels of well-being, but our performance potential is not being fulfilled, this is that $305 billion productivity shortfall, where if we could align ourselves to our strengths and capitalize on the best of ourselves, given we have well-being and capacity to give, what is possible in terms of this value creation layer or lens through which we can view this problem. If people's performance potential is not realized, they will not maintain a high level of well-being over time, and they can be considered a key flight risk. They will exit the organization, they'll find ways to actually make progress, or if they don't, unfortunately, they too slide into this bottom left zone. Where we want to spend as much of our time as possible and where we want to support people in getting to is the top right zone. Simultaneously investing in well-being and performance, not one at the expense of the other, in the fullness of work and life. So what does that actually look like when we model it with population data? So when every human being is a blue dot on this chart, and we can actually start to differentiate between significantly low levels, levels that are moderate or okay, and where there's strength on both axes, we see, and for those with a crash course in correlational statistics as an example, like there's a trend line here. There's something that we can observe. Yet, around that trend line, there's diversity, where some people are compromising well-being at the expense of performance, and others have capacity available. So rather than just having one metric that helps us to understand what's going on in our organizations, we need to have a picture of the human experience in work and life. What we can understand as well is that when well-being, which is often sacrificed, is invested in, 70% of those with high well-being are in the higher performance zone. However, if we look at those in the high performance zone with compromised well-being, that percentage drops to 6%. But beyond the numbers, in thinking about, and maybe you're already doing that, where would I be? Where am I at? And perhaps, where are the people that I work with? What would that pattern look like for my team, for my organization? So let's think about that now and actually reflect on it. Maybe you draw a little XY axis on your pads if you've got one handy in front of you, and challenge yourself with this. How well are you within the context of your work and your life? And how well are you performing and contributing in your work and your life? And is there actually a difference between work and life on well-being and performance? Now, it sounds simple enough to reflect on this, but it's not easy. So over to you, reflect for 30 seconds as best you can, and then I want you to have a chat to the person next to you, because we need to realize that data can paint a picture, but we need to have more human conversations about this phenomena. Over to you. All right. I'm really encouraged by the fact that we, as a group here, just dive into this conversation. We need to have more human conversations, and it's often the case as well that when we see this model, we realize we don't stop and actually reflect on how we would gauge or evaluate in the fullness of our experiences in life how things are going and what's competing with something else, and are we actually able to synchronize our efforts to be at our best. And this is simple enough as a model to look at, but it's not easy, it's complicated. And what I hope at the back end of this session is that there is a little bit of time to have some discussion if there's questions that need to be asked. But when it comes to honouring the human being and looking at people analytics and understanding data, and that in the age of technology innovation and artificial intelligence and so forth, that certain things are getting smarter and smarter for data, but other things are unfortunately maintaining, they're stuck in a blind spot. We're not focusing our attention where it needs to be to understand the whole human experience. And what we can also realize is that, and Al introduced this as well before, like when we're looking at how do you measure performance? How does an individual gauge how well they're performing? There's assumptions that are made. There are perceptions on their behalf of how well they're going relative to their expectations. And unless people can understand for themselves how they feel about how they're going, and are they being effective, and are they having the best contribution they can have, we need to open up this space for people to have that opportunity to reflect. We need to see this data and move beyond data insight to the other human insights that we have around that. Who are the people that are actually not fully appreciating the performance, impact, and contribution that they're having? They're pushing themselves so hard, but they're sacrificing their well-being in the process. And who here has a misaligned understanding of how well they're performing by comparison to what's actually going on? All of this around the data points is the conversation we need leaders to have with human beings. So where does well-being fit in? For us as an organization as well, we like to call ourselves Sherpas. So think about the Sherpa, right? They have the equipment and the tools and so forth, and they can see where we're trying to trek, but make no mistake about it, it's your trek. I'll support you as best I can, but you've got to actually make the climb. So what is the peak? What is the summit? Optimal well-being and performance in work and life, all of that needs to come together at the peak. And how do we help people to actually climb towards that? I'm going to give you a basic view of a model. And this theory and modeling is backed up by a lot of empirical evidence and data analytics. But it shows us the different components that we need to think a lot more deeply and thoughtfully about, and to get the analytics to back it up. In its simplest, there are demands that require our attention and effort and time, and there are the resources that we need to meet those demands. What we're seeing in organizations currently is a representation of the do more with less. There are more demands than there are available resources, and that's creating strain, and it's requiring people to perform beyond capacity to the extent that well-being is being compromised. Not all demands are created equally. There are challenge demands and hindrance demands in this modeling. Challenge demands are those meaningful challenges and tasks and projects that people need to do in order to achieve their objectives, and they're the things that people enjoy engaging with. So challenging demands are valuable and useful. But there are also hindrance demands. These are the demands within the context of working and living that actually get in the way of you being able to perform and function at your best. At the moment, there's a lot of hindering forces that are having an impact on people functioning and contributing effectively, as well as there being a high level of challenging demand on their plate in terms of workload. And at the moment, the reason why there's such imbalance is all we're doing to understand resources is looking at work-related resources. How do I know what they need in their job? How do we structure a team? How do we organize their work? We don't understand the whole human being in terms of the resources they need to actually rise to the occasion. So how do we start to shift this a little? Well, we start off, and this is that sort of what's broken and how do we make it okay model. Look at the hindering forces. Look at the things that are creating friction, that are requiring a lot of energy expenditure, that are getting in the way of people achieving optimal outcomes. What's broken? Fix it. There's lots of assessments, including culture assessments and engagement assessments, that can highlight some things that you need to focus on, where work needs to be redesigned because it's too highly demanding. Make no mistake about it, there's a lot of upside in focusing on the value in addressing those hindrances. Where we need to spend our time, and this is what's not being done very well or much at all, is to look more completely at the person, the human being, in the fullness of their work and life, their capacities, and their well-being is something that's often a clear blind spot. When we do those two components, we can start to calibrate ourselves towards more optimal outcomes over time. So that's the more digestible version of the model. Once again, I'm going to ask you to breathe because I'm going to show you the more complicated one. Breathe in. Exhale. There it is. So I'll speak through this and I'll do my best to give enough specificity and then realize that this needs to be an ongoing conversation. This is a representation of the job demands resources theory. And these are the component forces and pathways through which we need to understand our people and how we're working towards optimal outcomes. Where well-being and performance, not one at the expense of the other, is the objective. So if we look upstream, we have resources and we have demands. Demands create strain independently, and that drains us of our energies, including what we need to perform well and what we need from a well-being standpoint. So this compromises our outcomes. But to have no demands would be boring because demands don't happen in a vacuum. We have resources to rise to the occasion and meet those demands. But what's going on in the top half is we have an investment in resources that help people to be engaged. These are energy and capacity promoting that enable people to achieve more optimal well-being and performance outcomes. So the energy gain side of the equation. And the two interact is the important piece. So first we need to understand, are we actually building the right resources at the right time based on the demands that we have? So that's the first lever of influence that we need to consider here. When I'm talking about building here, we may have an understanding of the job and team resources. we may have significant blind spot when it comes to the whole person, personal resources and their life as a whole. Then we need to recognize that there will be demands and there will be challenges and there will be hindrances. What resources do we need to invest in to buffer the straining effect of high demands? How do we capacitate people to reduce the depleting effect of high demands? Classic example, rather than giving your finance team a day off after they've struggled their way through a very predictable episode in their calendar, can we instead invest in resources that set them up like pre-season to buffer against the depleting effects of this episode of their work calendar? Makes sense, doesn't it? You don't see an elite athlete just sort of make their way to the start line and then start running, and when they get to the other end, it's like, okay, cool, stretch, have a drink of water. No, it's too bloody late then. You need to provide people with the capacity up front so that they can actually engage the best of their energies when they need to. Then the third piece here is recognizing that challenges won't go away and we don't even want them to. Not all challenges are stress promoting or debilitating. Good challenges, meaningful challenges, help people to engage in and do their best work. So how do we elevate those, knowing that there's an additive effect where there's high and positive challenges that are meaningful and rewarding, but we give people the resources that they need? That's where we have optimal flow through engagement towards optimal outcomes. So this is where we need to spend our time, and I hope I've given enough behind this model for you to now have the conversation with these three levers. Build the resources that you need. How do you boost and buffer against challenges? I want you to have this conversation at your table group. I'm going to give you 3 minutes to do so. Hopefully that's enough time to either arrive at your first version answers to these questions, or at least take a brain break to process everything that you've consumed behind this modeling. But it's true that we need to invest our time in understanding these different forces and, in fact, modeling and capturing data on this whole system and how things actually unfold in reality. We need to do that in our organizations, but we need to respect and honor the fact that there's a whole human being that we need to understand in this mix as well. So where to from here? We need to employ systematic methodologies within our organizations in order to move this mission forward. And it starts with data and intelligence. So the first phase, and there are 3 phases through which we support organizations to move that then cycle, and we create a rhythm around this to continue a commitment at evolving organizational cultures over time. This is not some sort of transactional thing that you do in the year 2020 and dust off your hands because you've ticked that box. This is something we need to realize is really begging to be integrated into the flow of work. And we do that by first exploring and understanding and knowing what you need to do. Getting good intelligence and data and analytics helps us there, because there are a lot of blind spots that we need to bring to the surface. We then use data to inform our transformation agenda, and that is what innovations, initiatives, and changes do we need based on the data intelligence that is highlighted where things could be better. So do what needs to be done. Awareness raising, knowledge creation is not enough. We need to move from knowing better to doing better. And that requires a commitment and action over time. This is where leadership commitment is fundamental and central. Because we can get good data, we can package it up and we can tell a story, but unless we get our leaders understanding that the data that informs your strategy and your initiatives moving forward requires their commitment, otherwise it will not cut through with a level of continuity and sustainability over time, therein lies a really significant part of this puzzle. And finally, the evolve phase, being the best that you can, so transforming, living and learning and engaging with the things that enable you to grow, invest in the resources that you need to meet the demands, understand how these demands and resources fluctuate over time, realize how to be the best of yourself in the fullness of your life, not just your work. And through that experience, embed and integrate the routines, the systems, the processes that enable this to be repeatable over time. And from that learning experience, some things won't have worked out as well as they could. How do you take those insights as you cycle back through and explore once again? So that's the process that we need to move businesses through. When it comes to data analytics, it's not just about helping the business understand its people better, it's about helping people to understand themselves as well. And this is where people data for good and where HR technology needs to play. There needs to be a value, there needs to be benefit for the individual human being, not just for the organization. And as a result, when we profile the 8 key well-being and performance factors that support people at being their best and reaching their potential in work and life, they need to understand for themselves where they're at. As a dot on that scatter plot, what is the race that I need to run? Where do I need to invest in me, in my work and my life to be at my best? And how can an organization have a better and more sensitive read on the whole human experience, the employee experience and people's lives as a whole? So the final question is to consider, what are the rewards of doing this well? What are the benefits? What's the upside? And within the context of this conference and thinking about future of work, when we understand the population statistics around the impact that not doing this well is having, what are the risks if we don't make change in this space? This conversation needs to happen, and we need to realize that the human being is in our data, and we need to highlight and surface that more and more. And I really thank you very much for having me here on my soapbox, and I look forward to chatting with all of you over the coming days. Thank you so much.